It's time for another live mock draft, and this time we're doing head-to-head categories. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today. Frank Stampfl joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. This will be a two-part podcast covering the entire draft and then recapping our teams at the end, so make sure to stick around for that. And if you've missed any of our recent shows, remember that you can always go back and listen on demand. Last week we did Sleepers, Breakouts, and Bust 2.0. Make sure to check those out. And a big thank you to those watching us live. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you're listening on the podcast side, make sure to download, follow, and leave a 5-star review. We really appreciate it. So today on the show, as we mentioned, we're doing a 12-team live head-to-head categories mock draft, standard 5x5 categories. The lineup is as follows: one of each infield position, 3 outfielders, 2 utility spots, and then on the pitching side, 2 starting pitchers, 2 relief pitchers, and 4 pitchers. You can divide them up however you want to. Weekly lineups and a weekly 25 innings pitched minimum. Scott, what's going on, man? You are first up. You're on the clock.
I am. I don't often get to pick this early. I talk about how Aaron Judge is, I think, the obvious number one choice, regardless of the scoring format. So I'm going to follow through with that. I do have a little bit of hesitation in this scoring format in particular, because as we talked about on the, comparing the strategies to for head-to-head points and head-to-head categories relative to Roto, you have fewer lineup spots where you can balance the categories, so if you don't get a high-end base stealer who impacts other categories, I'm not sure it's worth getting a base stealer at all, but fortunately, Judge is at least a decent base stealer. So I like the idea of getting a ton of home runs and having a very good chance of winning that category every week, along with probably RBI and very likely runs scored. So Judge is the first choice in this draft.
Scotty, dropping the hammer. Aaron Judge first overall, then Jose Ramirez goes second. I'll be picking 6th in this draft, and our buddy Chris here will be picking 10th. What's going on?
Yeah, it's funny. Scott says, I rarely get the chance to pick first. Well, you know what, man? You're running the drafts. You just give yourself the first pick.
I try to
I'm sure you did this time. Meanwhile, I'm stuck in the back.
You were at the top last time, right?
Like some kind of jerk. Unacceptable.
I like to mix it up. You get to pick 10th this time. See, I originally put you 12th, and I'm like, during these podcast mocks, we always have somebody pick 12th. So let's see how it goes picking 10th.
And that's 2 better than 12th. So
unless you're talking about round 2, then it's 2 worse.
Well, we'll talk about round 2 when we get there, buddy.
Good plan.
Yeah, and it looks like might take a while. Where is RJ? Where is the enforcer? We need him to make a pick. And there he goes. So Jose Ramirez, Trey Turner, Ronald Acuna, and Juan Soto went. Juan Soto 5th overall. This is not an OBP league. I am very excited to get one of the, quote, consensus top 5 in Julio Rodriguez with the 6th pick in this draft. I've done a lot of mocks. I've done a lot of real drafts so far. I don't have Julio Rodriguez anywhere. This is the first time that I have drafted him. And obviously he's a pretty exciting player to get. So I'm expecting something around 25. Maybe the power takes another step forward this year, but 5 category contributor, monster season last year, expecting Julio Rodriguez to build off of that once again. Do you guys have a problem with Juan Soto going 5th overall in a head-to-head categories with batting average?
I don't think it's the right choice, but I don't think it's such an egregious choice, especially with Julio Rodriguez in particular. I think you can make a case that while Julio Rodriguez has upside that Juan Soto may not have just because he's a true 5 category guy, I think you can make a case that he's certainly a more volatile pick. And if you're not the type of person who wants to, take on any risk whatsoever in the first round, I think Julio Rodriguez represents probably the riskiest first round pick.
Definitely the riskiest going in the top half of the first round. I could agree on that. Doesn't have the big track record, and the steals slowed down in the second half. But I know there was a report in the offseason that Scott Service is not worried. He wants Julio to run, and so they're expecting him to do a lot of that again this season. After I took Julio Rodriguez, we saw Manny Machado go 7th overall. And I've been seeing him go a little bit higher in drafts. I'm in an NFBC slow draft where I think he went 9th or 10th overall. So that's kind of interesting. Mookie Betts went 8th. Kyle Tucker went 9th. And Chris, you just made your pick. Who was it?
Yordan Alvarez. I did have Shohei Ohtani ranked higher than him. And then once I'm actually facing the decision, I'm realizing I would still rather have Yordan Alvarez, especially with the hand not sounding like it's too big of a concern right now. So I did make the Yordan Alvarez pick. I also went ahead and changed the order of my rankings to reflect that. So truth in advertising here, folks.
I do think that Manny Machado pick at 7 is interesting. And if that's something you've been seeing more of, Frank, I think maybe that speaks to what analysts have experienced over and over again, because obviously everyone in this role does a lot of drafting over the course of March and even before. And somebody picking in the middle like George Kurtz is 7th overall may not like missing out on the high-end third baseman so much either. So this was something I was talking about early in draft prep season. I might just take, I was using like Rafael Devers versus Freddie Freeman as the comparison, and I might just go ahead and take the third baseman so I don't risk missing out. But that sentiment might be being amplified now. It helps that Yordan Alvarez has new concerns that he didn't have a few weeks ago, and maybe he would have been the obvious choice at 7 otherwise. But I think it's, I think those high-end third basemen are maybe being driven up as people become more aware of the scarcity.
All right. Well, after Chris took Yordan Alvarez, we saw Fernando Tatis. Sorry, Chris. A draft where you will not get him. It just feels so weird that he won't be on your team. Freddie Freeman goes at the turn. It's worth noting, once again, this is a weekly lineup league. So in case you're wondering, why hasn't Shohei Ohtani gone? This is actually kind of late for him to go. But if it's a daily lineup league, he's the first overall pick.
If it's a daily lineup league and it's a single player that you can slot at either pitcher or hitter. See, in Yahoo, which is what this league is kind of styled around, they split up Ohtani into 2 players. So if it's a daily league on Yahoo, you're probably not taking Ohtani first overall. But if it's a daily league on CBS, then sure. In a daily format, that would make total sense.
Yeah, definitely worth, throwing that distinction out there. It's got to be one player in a daily lineup league where you can reap all the benefits of Shohei Ohtani. And finally, he goes at 14th overall. At the turn, Mike Trout and Freddie Freeman both went to Raymond Atherton. And Chris, you're back on the clock. No Fernando Tatis, but you do have Yordan Alvarez.
I have Yordan Alvarez, and I'm considering what to do here. And it's down to either Vlad Guerrero and Rafael Devers. I never do I'm going to take the third baseman thing, but I'm going to take the third baseman. It's not really so much that it's Vladimir Guerrero. I'm not worried about the knee. I think he'll be fine, but I'm not sure he's so much better than Rafael Devers to make up for the positional scarcity gap there. And so I'll see what it looks like when I make a point to take a third baseman early.
Hey, you have 2 of 3 of Scott's perfect draft strategy. So Yordan Alvarez, Rafael
Pretty
Devers.
good so far.
Will you take a second baseman at the end of the
Probably not.
Well, we will find out.
What if it's Jazz Chisholm, Chris?
Whoa, no name dropping. Come on, Scott. After Rafael Devers went to Chris, Vladimir Guerrero and Bobby Witt are off the board. Oh, I'm on deck. So I guess I should figure out who I want to draft. I'm not going to throw any names out there yet because I want to see who George Kurtz takes, of course. Bobby Witt at 17 overall. It might be a touch early for us, but I think around the industry, that's probably the right spot.
Yeah, that's about right. I've got him 20th. It makes more sense than the top 8 pick that he was in NFC drafts, at least early on. And by the way, Frank, if you want to turn the sound notifications on your draft, we can do that. I did realize there's a way to prevent the sound from coming out on the audio.
Oh, okay. Well,
that's only on the stream though. You recorded on your own. Forget what I said.
All right. Yeah. Cause I was a little confused. I'm like, we don't need any sound here. I think we'll be all right. So Bo Bichette goes. So George takes Manny Machado at 7 and then Bo Bichette at 18. I think that's a pretty awesome start. I got Julio Rodriguez in the first, and I'm going to go ahead and I will take that third baseman. I'll take Austin Riley. So I've got some speed with Julio, of course, and tons of power. I mean, between those two, I probably have 55 at least home runs, probably 60 plus. So yeah, I think that's a pretty fun start between those two, Austin Riley and Julio Rodriguez. Well, I take a second baseman in the third.
So here's the question. Does Scott take Nolan Arenado?
If it's even an option to me, it may not be. I've certainly seen Nolan Arenado go late second.
If Scott doesn't get Nolan Arenado here, he might start spiraling.
I kind of hope someone take yes.
Now someone needs to take Jose Altuve, and we'll really see sparks fly.
Oh yeah, that should make for some fun podcasting. We just cheered because Nolan Arenado went off the board 21st overall. I'm sorry, Scott, but
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I've been seeing it more and more, and I kind of wanted to. That's sort of what I wanted to experience. Is what if I just don't ever have a shot at one of those high-end third basemen, which picking first overall makes that the most likely.
Did that give you some pause about taking Aaron Judge instead of Jose Ramirez?
Well, we'll see. We'll see how it ends up going, because that is something to consider. Obviously, if you're picking first overall, you could just take Jose Ramirez, who's my second overall player, and then you can avoid that conflict entirely. I was doing an ADP review earlier today and kind of amazed by how late. Let me see here. I'm trying to talk and make my pick at the same time. So I definitely want to take Jose Altuve. Unfortunately, it looks like my rankings are defaulting to points leagues here.
Yeah, they are.
Same.
So that's unfortunate. So I'll definitely take Altuve. And who am I going to pair him with here? So I think... Let me double check.
I think Pete Alonso's the best player to take, but you could argue that's a little overkill with Aaron Judge already.
You could, but I don't think overkilling power is such a bad idea in a head-to-head category.
Sure,
because obviously you're going
three categories basically,
right? And you need reliability to feel like you're going to have consistency in a category. You need the more the merrier, I think.
And there's a lot of volatility week over week in terms of home run output, even when you have, some of the best.
I mean, I'm considering Michael Harris instead. Obviously, he plays the scarcer position. Obviously, I have some concerns about him. He would give me some steals that I didn't get a ton of in round one. But I think I'm going to go Alonso.
Yeah. That's more fun too, Scott. I mean, you get the home run Bash Bros in New York. Judge
if it was a 5 outfielder league, I would have gone Harris for sure. But I think it being a 3 outfielder league, I really like, and I think it's more important in this format even than Roto. But even in Roto, I really like building a big power foundation early on, because I feel like it just frees you up to do so many different things later than if you're feeling like you have to claw back into the home run race, which gets pretty difficult now that the juice ball era is over. It gets pretty difficult to do that. Big power sources late are generally going to drag you down in batting average severely, or have major health or playing time issues. So I'd rather not mess with that group if I don't have to.
Lots of picks off the board since Nolan Arenado went 21st overall. Garrett Cole, Corbin Burns, and then Jose Altuve went to Scott to close out round 2. Starting up round 3, Pete Alonso, Spencer Strider, Matt Olson, and Sandy Alcantara. And I am on deck. I've got Austin Riley and Julio Rodriguez. And yeah, the rankings are kind of throwing me off a little bit because they're using head-to-head points. Marcus Semien goes, so I do not think I will be starting with the outfield, third base, second base, Scott White strategy. I think I'm probably going to wait at starting pitcher. Francisco Lindor is an option at shortstop. Just continue building up power, speed. JT Realmuto in a one-catcher league. Probably not. There's nobody I love here at this spot. I think I'm going to go Francisco Lindor and just see what pitchers make it back to me. That could wind up being a mistake. Maybe I should take a pitcher here. I still do like getting one of my top, 8 to 10-ish guys. But we'll see if those guys make it back to me or not. So my team to start, I've got Austin Riley, Francisco Lindor, and Julio Rodriguez. So again, each of those good for at least 25 home runs, I would say. And then Lindor and Julio probably combining for somewhere around 40 steals. So I like it. I like it so far. Batting average, it's probably just mediocre, 275-ish, 270 in that range. After I took Francisco Lindor, Max Scherzer goes off the board. Jazz Chisholm.
Woo.
Chris, one pick away, man. You could have got Jazz. You could have had the second base.
You're getting jazzed for Jazz?
I was thinking about taking Jazz there. Yeah, I had 3 players in my queue, and he was certainly one of them. So not going to get him. And it would have been a good pick, I think, just because I do need some stolen bases after a start with Rafael Devers and Yordan Alvarez. I mean, I could opt to punt, and frankly, the guy I was going to take just got taken before my pick. That's a little frustrating. That was JT Realmuto. So little bit of a sniping there. And I'm going to take a guy that I have not taken at all this year and see how I feel about it. That's Michael Harris, who I don't love when he's a top 24 pick, but 34th overall, that starts to get a little closer to where I think he should go. I think there are concerns about him replicating last year's power production, especially. I think there are some concerns about how he'll handle lefties, but I have him ranked 36, so it's right around where I think he should go.
In theory, he's a 5-category contributor at the weakest position. So
and I do think he is a 5-category guy. It's just a question of
the quantity.
Is he the 30 homer guy he looked like last year? No, I think he's probably more like a 20 homer guy. I think we're going to see worse production from Michael Harris this season than we got last season, but I still think he'll be very, very good.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I struggle with him is okay, look at the ground ball rate, very high, too high to sustain the power he produced last year, we would think. The plate discipline, pretty bad. Normally, you're not going to be the consistent 300 he's been between the majors and the minors, consistent 300 hitter with plate discipline that bad. But it's one of those where if he is legitimately if Michael Harris is legitimately who he was last year, then we really need him to be that, at this range in the draft, that's just the perfect pick if he is who he is. And so that's where I'm I don't know that I'm so stuck on how right I'm possibly going to be with this bust call. Cause how often do I get bust calls right? In a good year, 50% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, it might be more like
that. And there are grades to that too. There are bus calls that you definitely get right. And then there are guys who you think, I think we all feel about Michael Harris. Well, Frank, I don't know if you have him in your bus, but Scott and I do.
I do. Yep.
And it's less, this guy is bad, and more, he might not be as good as we think. And those are very different things, because Michael Harris could be the 50th player next year, be a little bit of a disappointment, and still be a very useful fantasy option. So I think that's probably more like what we all expect than, it's not going to be a, blanking on the Yankees rookie of the year guy. He didn't end up winning rookie of the year, but he was number 2 to Shohei Ohtani.
Miguel Andujar?
Miguel Andujar. Yeah, it's not going to be a Miguel Andujar situation.
Yeah, that's what we think. I hate every time Michael Harris comes up because I got to talk him down, and it's nothing about the player. He's awesome, National League Rookie of the Year. It's the price tag for me, and I still don't like him going in the 3rd round. If he slips far enough, maybe I'll take a shot at him. But in most drafts, someone likes Michael Harris more than I do, so I wind up not drafting him. And things did work out okay because I wind up getting Brandon Woodruff, and I'll talk about him in just a bit. But let's catch people up on the picks. After Chris took Michael Harris, Justin Verlander, and Randy Arozarena to finish out round 3. Starting up round 4, Corey Seager, Corbin Carroll. Chris took Ozzie Albies. All right, so
2 of my bus picks.
Doubling down on the Atlanta Braves. Edwin Diaz went, Jacob deGrom, Shane O'Mac.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
That's Shane McClanahan. I took Brandon Woodruff, then Alex Bregman, Zach Wheeler, and Kyle Schwarber. Scott, I know you're coming up, so I'll throw this your way, Chris. Corey Seager and Corbin Carroll at 37 and 38. I mean, these are two players we've talked about all off season long, how much we like these guys. There's a lot of hype around Carroll. I think he had a near 110 exit velocity batted ball on Tuesday. So he's starting to show more of that throughout spring. Has the hype gone too far? What do you think about the price tag on those two?
It's too early, I think, for both of them, but it's not far from where I've got Corey Seager, for instance. I do have him inside of my top 48, so I think the price is overall okay. Carroll's more like 60, but I'm realizing this year, or as we continue to more drafts this year, that I'm not going to end up with Corbin Carroll on my team. It's just I'm going to have to make a point to draft him at some point, because even at 64, which I think is ahead of his ADP, I'm not ending up with him anywhere. So he is obviously an incredibly skilled player and someone who I think I'm going to have to make a reach for at some point.
All right. After Alex Bregman went Zach Wheeler, Kyle Schwarber, Luis Robert, and Scott, you are up. Looking at my rankings, it looks like, 10 of the top 11 players on my list are all starting pitchers. Scott, what are you going to do?
Yeah, I'm thinking it through. So obviously I got a couple mashers in Aaron Judge and Pete Alonso, and haven't really addressed steals at all. Should get some from Judge. I'm going to go ahead and take Cedric Mullins here, get another outfielder. He is more of a steals specialist than I'd like to draft in this format, but he's going to get between 12 to 15 home runs probably, and I have a nice home run surplus already, and the fact that he meets a scarce position, I'm okay with it. For this other pick, I'm debating between Emmanuel Class A. I don't normally take a stud closer. I'd be more inclined to do it in this format. And O'Neal Cruz.
Ooh.
Corey Seager's already gone. But it is a league without middle infield spots. So shortstops can slide a long way. And so I think I'm going to go with Emmanuel Class A here, which is more by the book, I would say, by going by ADP definitely, than O'Neal Cruz is. If it was a real league, I might go Cruz, because I don't think I have Cruz in a real league yet. But let's go with Class A and see if I end up happy with my shortstop situation. I suspect I will.
It is worth noting it's a 2 utility league. So
true.
Yeah.
There's a decent chance that someone's going to have 3 shortstops in their lineup in this league, as would happen in a normal Roto league, potentially.
All right. Well, let's take our first break here on Fantasy Baseball Today. And when we get back, we'll catch you up on the latest picks.
Meanwhile, on Paramount Mountain.
Okay, we have the northern face, the southern face, and
the Sylvester Stallone face. Of course.
Hey, how you doing? How you doing?
Is that Dad? Yeah.
No, don't sneeze.
Dear God, no.
Hold it.
hold it.
Don't do it. Down. Ha! Gesundheit. Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, welcome back. We had a few picks while you were gone. Right after Scott was debating Emmanuel Class A or O'Neal Cruz, guess what? O'Neal Cruz goes 50th overall. No surprise there.
You got to wonder if that name hadn't come out of my mouth. I don't know that everybody participating is watching, but that does seem to happen a lot, right?
Yes. And, it makes for good content, right? As soon as you bring up a name, boom, goes off the board. After O'Neal Cruz, Aaron Nola, George Springer, and Shane Bieber. And the top of my rankings, I still got a bunch of starting pitchers here, but I don't think I need to kind of force the issue. Let's take a look at my team. I've got Austin Riley, Francisco Lindor, Julio Rodriguez, and Brandon Woodruff. Taking a look down, Adolis Garcia is my top ranked hitter available. What does this team need? Got some speed, got some power, maybe a little bit of batting average. I think it's time. I'm going to go with one of my favorites, one of my breakouts. Every year he's a breakout for me. I'm going to take Eloy Jimenez, get my second outfielder off the board. I think he gives me 280 plus batting average, and hopefully he could stay healthy and finally deliver that 30 to 35 home run season that I think he's capable of. But some power to go along with batting average, and I already got a decent amount of steals, so I don't think I needed to force the issue or anything with Adolis Garcia. And Chris, you're coming up. Before we do that, just have a quick read. It's bracket time, and the Eye on College Basketball podcast is your destination for top-notch March Madness coverage for the next 3 weeks. Join Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander as they offer 4 region-by-region previews, plus a mega bracket preview with all the advice you need to win that office pool. Download and follow Eye on College Basketball wherever podcasts are found. After I took Eloy Jimenez, Brian Reynolds, Gunnar Henderson, Tim Anderson are all gone. And
I want to talk about Gunnar Henderson here going 56th overall. Because what I was saying as we were coming up to the end of round 2, remember Nolan Arenado went, and I was saying, I was just doing this ADP review, and I was kind of marveling at how late Gunnar Henderson goes by ADP. He goes beyond the 90th pick. 15 picks after Corbin Carroll on average. And so, that got me thinking, well, maybe I'm a little too stressed if I can get Gunnar Henderson that late. But this is him going 56th instead of 90th. It exemplifies why I still don't want to do that, because you don't know exactly when in your own personal league that one player. He's the one player, right? I guess Alex Bregman is still out there, but
no, Bregman's
more
gone,
safe
Scott.
than exciting. More safe than exciting.
Bregman went in the 4th round, Scott.
Okay, so Bregman already went.
Yeah. Yep.
Like it almost requires you to reach for him if you're that invested in filling third base, and you can't just sit around and wait for the ADP. This goes back to the ADP discussion we were having earlier this year. I mean, it's one thing to know where on average he tends to go, but when it's the same, when it's the one example of the player who fits this need, it makes it all the more likely somebody's going to jump in 2-3 rounds earlier and take him, as happened here.
Well, Scott, there's another young, exciting third baseman that you might have to rely on a little bit later on. We'll see if you're the one who makes the pick or not.
We'll see.
After Gunnar Henderson, I mentioned Tim Anderson. Chris took Dylan Cease and Alek Manoah. Dylan Cease made a spring training start on Tuesday, and he didn't give up 11 earned runs, so that was nice to see.
I'll take the victory.
Chris, I was wondering if you were going for the Marmol strategy, because you started off with 4 hitters, but it turns out you were just kind of waiting on starting pitcher.
Well, you can still do it, but I mean, you look at the way the draft has gone so far, and 15 of the first 61 picks have been pitchers. Clearly, there's a tilt in this draft room specifically right now, and it's away from starting pitchers. And so, you know me, I'm going to zig when everyone else is zagging. And if, I don't love Dylan Cease, but if I can get him at 58th overall, I'm not going to complain at all about that kind of value. So that's, very un-Chris Towers team so far. 3 of my bust picks on my team, but the value's mostly been right on those guys. So I'm okay with it.
All right. After you took Dylan Cease, Alek Manoah, and Julio Urias to finish up round 5. Starting round 6, we see Tommy Edman and Josh Hader go. Chris, you're back on the clock, and you took Walton Varsho. That's good value, man.
Yeah.
63rd overall. That's good.
I like it.
I wanted Real Muto in the previous, or not the previous turn, but maybe the one before that. No, it was the previous turn in the 4th round or 3rd round. Yeah. Anyway, I wanted him there. I'd love to get the out of position steals, especially when I start out with Jordan Alvarez and Rafael Devers, but Real Muto was not to be. So I'll settle for Dalton Varsho and, the 18-ish steals that I think I'm going to get from him.
All right.
I was starting to get excited there that he might make it all the way back to me, because before, I went with Emmanuel Clase. I was debating O'Neal Cruz. Dalton Varsho was in my head there as well at the 4-5 turn. I didn't bring it up, obviously, but I think in this format where you have just the 10 hitter spots to get a potential 2020 catcher, I think it's more valuable in this format than any other.
All right. After Chris took Dalton Varsho, Yu Darvish, Vinny Pasquantino, and Starling Marte off the board. Starling Marte returned to game action on Tuesday after getting hit by hitting the helmet with a pitch the other day. I'm debating taking a starting pitcher. I don't think I need to yet. I mean, this guy's just going so late. I brought up his name last pick that I made in the 5th round, and I'm going to go ahead and take Adolis Garcia. So my outfield is full. I've got filled 3 outfield spots already. We do have 2 utility spots as well, but I've said it time and time again. I don't think that there is a huge difference between Adolis Garcia and Randy Arozarena. Garcia, one of 4 hitters to go 25-25 last year. There is some risk. The plate discipline, he's a little bit older than you'd like him to be. But, man, to get someone that gives me power and speed like that in the middle of the 6th round, I'll take it. It feels like no one wants Adolis Garcia, so I'll
that's
to be that guy.
I get being skeptical about the plate discipline and his age, but it's also, we literally did the exact same dance last year. And then he came out and had just as good of a season, arguably. And I don't know, like,
he was better, Chris. I mean, he improved.
And so, like, I get that there's some risk there, but it does feel like he's probably being unfairly dinged for the risk factors. Yeah, there's probably not that much of a difference between Cedric Mullins and Randy Arozarena and Adolis Garcia.
After I took Garcia, Luis Castillo, Max Muncy, 69th overall. This is not a head-to-head points league or an OBP format, so that seems pretty early for Max Muncy. Will Smith.
They're just trying to deny me my 3rd baseman, Frank.
That's exactly what it is.
They're vindictive.
And I'm here for it because we'll get Scott tilting in about 30 minutes from now. After Will Smith goes, the catcher, of course, Raisel Iglesias. And Scott, you are up for 2. I'll remind people of your team. I believe you do not have a starting pitcher yet.
I'm about to take one.
All righty.
The last in a tier for me is Max Fried.
Okay.
Not going to be Studley with the strikeouts, but should be Studley in the other 3 starting pitcher categories, ERA, WHIP, and wins, pitching for the Braves. So I think of him as a borderline ace. I could go with another pitcher here, maybe a Framber Valdez, Zach Gallen. I was kind of leaning toward oh crap, now I forgot who I was going to take. I remember. Okay, I was kind of leaning toward Devin Williams.
Ooh.
After already taking Emmanuel Class A and just accepting the value and saying, all right, I don't have to worry about drafting closers anymore. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to practice what I'm preaching here and make sure I get impact out of my catcher spot, make sure I get more of a power foundation with a guy I'm continuing to draft more and more, Salvador Perez. I think he is the most likely to lead his position in home runs. I think he's the most likely to lead his position in RBI. It might be a significant amount in both areas. And, you know, I basically feel as he's the same player I thought he was going into last season. It's just he's coming off a much more disappointing outcome, in part because he was playing through a thumb injury for so long. And when he came back, he was much better. So I don't know why I wasn't on him earlier in draft prep season, but I find in like this round 7 range, I'm drafting Salvador Perez more and more.
Yeah, I saw Dan Zimborski from Fangraphs had him as a bust, and he's a really smart guy, invented the Zips projection system. I think it's a decent case, but I also look at, the projection that he's referring to was his like 20th percentile outcome, which was like a 240 average, 195 ISO. And it's like, if Salvador Perez plays every day, stays healthy, hits 240 with a 195 ISO, he's probably hitting 30 home runs and he's probably driving in 85 to 90 runs. And it's like, I agree that there is some risk there given his age and his contact profile. And there have been some concerning in zone contact rate trends for him, but like, it just feels like it's the only 30 homer guy that you can get at the catcher position, or the only relatively sure thing 30 homer guy at the position.
Plus, I think it's reasonable with Perez. Everything before the thumb injury, just throw it out. Like, he clearly wasn't swinging the bat like he's capable of because his thumb was hurting. And so that seems like a pretty easy variable to factor into your analysis, but sometimes with projection systems, it doesn't happen.
After Scott took Salvador Perez, we see Jose Abreu, Christian Javier, Framber Valdez, Kevin Gausman, all 3 in a row. Really wanted one of Javier or Kevin Gausman as my SP2, but it was not meant to be. So I wound up taking Ryan Presley. He is my first closer. Wanted to get one of those top tier elite type closers, a little bit older, but obviously still really good numbers last year. The swinging strike rate was back up, and closes for one of the best teams in baseball with the Houston Astros. After Presley, Anthony Rizzo, Devin Williams, and Xander Bogaerts. Chris, you are up. Let's get back
pretty early for Rizzo, right?
Yes, it was early for Rizzo and for Max Muncy earlier.
Jose Abreu still out there?
No, he's gone.
Oh, okay.
All right, so Chris, so far on your team, you have Dalton Varsho, Ozzy Albies, Rafael Devers, Yordan Alvarez, Michael Harris, and just one starting pitcher, Dylan Cease.
Yep, I'm going to go with a closer. I think I would say pretty close to the end of the tier, if not the end of the tier. Jordan Romano. You've got like Ryan Helsley and Kenley Jansen and Camilo Doval left. I think there's a little bit of a Jordan Romano, a bit of a teardrop there. So I'll take best closer available, just because I feel like the hitters that are left, I don't necessarily love all of them.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. That's exactly where I was at, and that's why I was either looking at starting pitcher or a closer. But Chris takes Jordan Romano, and one pick later, Byron Buxton, which is earlier than he usually goes. The ADP is around 100 for Buxton, so he goes 83rd overall. Chris, any regrets that you didn't take Buxton?
No, I mean that would have been a third outfielder in my first 7 picks. That's probably a little too much. So
Chris, there's nothing wrong with that, Chris. Believe me.
No, there's nothing wrong, especially in a 2 utility league, because you do get a little bit of added flexibility there. But it didn't seem like the right time for it. Although, probably gonna. It's funny. I'm the Byron Buxton guy, but I don't end up with him in like even half my leagues.
It seems like you're pretty chill about it when it happens. Like, how many times have we had this conversation? Oh, Chris,
Yeah, 'cause
you get Buxton? Is your
can-
heart broken?
I can understand the risks, and I don't have to have him in every league.
All right. Showing a little bit more restraint this year, Chris. I appreciate that.
I feel like I didn't have him in every league last year either.
That's true.
Might have been close though.
After Buxton,
Definitely the year before.
Felix Bautista goes with the last pick of round 7. Felix Bautista made his spring debut on Tuesday, coming back from knee and shoulder troubles, and he pitched a clean inning and struck out 2. The velocity was down like 1.2 miles per hour, but I would say that's pretty normal for pitchers, their first appearance or so in spring. So, of course, I'm glass half full. So I'm always going to try and make the case for Felix Bautista, and I feel pretty good about where he's at so far. Zach Gallen goes with the first pick of round 8, followed by Carlos Rodon. Okay, so
yeah,
86.
I was thinking about Rodon.
86th overall. Based on
All
the
right.
way we've been talking things out, this is about SP24. So I think it makes sense at this point.
I mean, when I heard, okay, he was dealing with the same thing, opposite side of the elbow, the strain from the UCL, and he was dealing with the same thing last May and just pitched through it. It's like, all right. This doesn't sound like anything to be that freaked out about. And of course, he's going to give you a ton of strikeouts, which would have paired nicely with Max Fried for me. So I was kind of eyeing him for my next pick, Carlos Rodon. I also want to go back to the 3rd pick of round 7, Christian Javier, 2 picks after I took Salvador Perez. Remember, I was saying, I could take Framber Valdez, Gallen. I think I just need to move Christian Javier up into that same tier with Max Fried, because I never get to draft him, and I'm tired of missing out. I just added him to next week I'm adding him to Breakouts 2.0.
Me too.
Yeah. So I need to I need my rankings to reflect that. I need to give myself a chance to draft Christian Javier, because I just straight up forgot about him in that range.
Yep, I just moved him directly behind Max Fried. I want to move him even higher, but the guy I have directly ahead of Max Fried is Dylan Cease. And I can't really make a case for Christian Javier ahead of Dylan Cease, because my criticism of Dylan Cease as a breakout or as a bust candidate this year is a lot of his improvement last year was tied to quality of contact suppression. Well, that's also kind of true of Christian Javier. He's got that fastball that does a really good job of generating weak contact. And I have to be consistent at least some of the time.
Some of the time. Yes, we appreciate it. Chris, you took Wander Franco at 87th overall. Love the pick. I was looking at him last round, but as we say often, if you take shortstop early, you're just kind of in this predicament where, do I want to take another shortstop? We do have 2 utility spots here, so I easily could have done it, but I passed on Wander Franco myself.
And the one thing that the build that I have right now really does need is batting average. Don Varsha is not going to be a good batting average source. Ozzy Albies, even if I'm wrong about him being a bust, probably not going to be a good source of batting average. So I could use some batting average help. And that's the one thing we feel very confident Wander Franco is going to give us, even if the breakout doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. And I wrote him up as a breakout in Breakouts 2.0. I think he was hampered by injury all year last year. This is Wander Franco we're talking about. And he was really good in April. So hopefully, that little small sample size is more of what's to come for Wander Franco. And after Chris took him, Clayton Kershaw, Adley Rutschman, Ryan Helsley, I took Joe Musgrove as my SP2. It sounds like he'll miss 1 or 2 starts to open the season with that fractured toe. After Musgrove, Dansby Swanson, Reese Hoskins, Whit Merrifield. I have a note on Merrifield. We'll come back to him. Teoscar Hernandez, I think that's really good value. 95th overall at the end of round 8. Mm-hmm. And Scott, you're on the clock for 2. Oh, Scott, I was like, is Scott frozen? Your mic is muted.
Sorry. Too much coughing. Yes, this is where I don't like picking at the ends because it's hard for me to anticipate what's going to happen. What I'm going to do here, since I've gone pretty light at starting pitcher, is take my chances among the hitter ranks, within the hitter ranks. This being a format where we don't go as deep into the hitter ranks because there are only 10 hitter spots to fill. And I'm going to go back to back with a couple of pitchers who I think have 200 plus strikeout potential. Since my ace is Max Fried, he doesn't have that, presumably. Going with Robbie Ray, and I'm a little bit of a reach here since I'm picking at the end, but he tends to go earlier in drafts. Chris Sale is who I'm going to pair him with.
Nice.
So that gives me a top 3 of Max Fried, Robbie Ray, Chris Sale. I think there's a lot of upside with that group. I think they complement each other well. And I also have a stud closer and Emmanuel Clase.
All right. So we are getting into round 9 here. Let's take our second break here in hour 1, and we'll be back right after this.
The top players from the best schools and conferences in Black college basketball will compete for the second ever HBCU All-Star Game, April 2nd on CBS.
Welcome back into Fantasy Baseball today. After Scott, I was reading Chris Sale. That was the name I wanted to say, and then I just combined them together. Scott took Chris Sale, first pick of round 9, then Alejandro Kirk, Clay Holmes, and Kenley Jansen. All right. Clay Holmes before Kenley. That's kind of interesting. Don't really see that happen very often. Clay Holmes.
People really don't like drafting Kenley Jansen, I've discovered. Which is why I keep drafting Kenley Jansen, just not when I draft Class A.
I agree. I mean, look, he's a little bit older. I get it with Kenley Jansen, but he's so proven, and the Red Sox have been dying for a closer for the past 5 years or so.
Right.
So I think he's pretty safe. And Clay Holmes, I would say the exact opposite about. I don't know how safe he is. I mean, even when he was healthy in the postseason last year, the Yankees went to multiple relievers, dealt with a back issue last year. He completely fell apart in the second half.
Yeah,
I'm not as excited to ever draft Clay Holmes. I don't think I've wound up with him on a single team yet.
I mean, there comes a point where he's a better bet for 30 saves than most of what's left, but not with Kenley Jansen still on the board. It's been a few years in a row of this. Okay, this is Kenley Jansen's on the verge of losing it, and then he never does. So,
the fantasy baseball community has written off Kenley Jansen 4 or 5 years in a row now.
What's dead may never die. Kenley Jansen. After he went, we saw Tristan McKenzie. I took Andres Jimenez, somebody I'm not overly excited to draft this year. I think he's fine. He gives you power and speed. The StatCast numbers, not great. The expected numbers, also not great for Andres Jimenez last year. But to get him at 102nd overall as my starting second baseman, I'm good with that. Before we get back to the picks, I've got one more read here for you. It's a great time of year. We've got spring training baseball, the World Baseball Classic, and of course, college basketball brackets are about to begin. Compete against Scott, Chris, and me in our FBT March Madness bracket on the CBS Sports app. All you have to do is scan the QR code in the top right corner of the screen or go to cbssports.com/baseball. The link can also be found in the podcast or YouTube description. And after you join our bracket, make sure to run men's and women's pools with friends and family for the chance to win a new car and trips to the 2024 Final Four. Play today on the CBS Sports app or visit cbssports.com/play to sign up. No purchase necessary. See terms and rules for details. All right. So Giancarlo Stanton went after my Andres Jimenez pick, George Kirby at 104th, then Luis Severino, and Carlos Correa goes to you, Chris. And you took Wander Franco with your previous pick. So
Filling in that utility spot.
You did exactly what I said I didn't want to do. So.
It's just, well, I don't want to fill my utility spot early. I don't think this counts. I've only got three lineup spots left, including my other utility spots. So it's not like, I'm really limiting myself here moving forward. That's partially because I've only taken 2 pitchers so far. But also just like Carlos Correa is awesome. And I just got him at 106th overall. It feels like we're taking the Carlos Correa skepticism too far. I know the concerns about his ankle based on the failed physicals. That's something you don't generally see particularly often. And I get that that's scaring some people away, but it sounds like that's more of a like year 3, year 4 thing. And maybe it'll just be an issue right away, but he really hasn't had any ankle issues in the majors. So I don't have very many short-term concerns about it. I think he's going to be better than he was last season in terms of the counting stats. He had the weirdly low RBI and run numbers, but otherwise he was very good. I think he's just plain undervalued right now.
Yeah, Carlos Correa was really good last year. It's just him having 64 RBI and 70 runs batting high in the Twins lineup seems like one of the biggest statistical oddities in all of 2022, and it's not going to happen again.
It's like Rafael Devers, only having 84 and 88. It's just that's not being held against him in the same way. Correa wasn't as good as Rafael Devers, but I think I'm expecting if he hits 290-ish again with 20 plus homers, I think you're going to get 85 and 85 out of him at least.
However, Chris.
I'll
cut you off, Frank. I'm mad at you.
Oh, no.
I mean, it's partly my fault. This is why you can't anticipate when you're picking at the ends. I looked ahead. Okay, I'm one of only 2 teams who needs a shortstop. There's Correa out there. There's Willie Adames out there. Maybe I'll be okay. Maybe one of them will get back to me. You take Correa as a utility and somebody else.
Ray Atherton took
Adames again as a utility. So the 2 teams without a shortstop remain without a shortstop. And
there's a gap now. You've got Jeremy Pena, Nico Horner, Javier Baez, Ahmed Rosario. I think I know who you're going to end up with, but it might be a little while before we see him.
Well, we'll see. We'll see, Chris.
Little round 15 Ezekiel Tovar, maybe.
All right, let's let Frank catch us up.
After Chris took Carlos Correa, Logan Webb, and Sean Murphy to finish out round 9. Then Willie Adames, great value, 109th overall. Jorge Polanco. Chris took Bryce Harper at 111th. Brandon Lau, Tyler O'Neill, and Hunter Green. I'm going to go ahead and take my SP2. I can already tell you, even before we get to the recap, I'm not going to like the pitching staff that I wound up with because as much as I like Lance Lynn, I like him as a 3. I do not like him as an SP2. And so he's my SP2 to go along with Brandon Woodruff. I've got Ryan Presley as a closer as well. But I think I probably overdid it with hitting throughout this draft. We'll see ultimately how it turns out. But
I already have 3 pitchers before you got 2, Frank. Maybe I overdid it with pitching.
I know. We're each listening to each other too much, Scott. So you're listening to me. You're maybe drafting more pitchers now, and then I'm listening to you, and I'm waiting on pitching. And
and nobody's listening to me.
Everyone listens.
Where do you stand, Chris?
Talk to me about Bryce Harper, Chris. 111th overall. I actually did a huge rankings update here on Tuesday afternoon, and I have him right around 133rd overall. And I think that was the lowest of all of us.
That is higher than I would normally take him. However, I am leaning into offense and offensive upside in this draft. It's a shallower league than you typically see with categories. So I don't think there are many players who have as much upside as Bryce Harper when he's right. Obviously, we don't know when he's going to be right. We don't know if he's going to be right, but just felt like an opportunity to add huge upside here.
All right. After Bryce Harper, I mentioned that pick. Lance Lynn, I took at 115. Camilo Doval. Jordan Walker goes off the board and dealing with a shoulder strain. He returned back to game action on Tuesday. So it seems like all good on the Jordan Walker front.
Yeah, I mean, that pick earned a grimace out of me because I was preparing to take him.
Yeah.
It's always a day late, $1 short if you don't get in the front door at third base.
You know what I just realized? I have Joe Musgrove on my team. Forget everything I said about Lance Lynn being my SB2. I completely forgot that I have Joe Musgrove on my team. So I've got Woodruff, I've got Musgrove, and Lance Lynn. That's not bad. In hindsight, if I remembered that correctly, I would have taken Blake Snell. I feel like Snell would have fit my team more, gives me more strikeouts. And those first two pitchers are relatively safe. So, yeah, if I could do it over, I probably would have taken Snell over Lance Lynn. But alas, here we are. Snell went 119. And Scott, you were up. You took Nate Lowe with one of your picks. And now we're into round 11.
So this is the position I hate being in. And it's more likely to happen when I'm picking at the ends and have to wait so long in between picks. But nonetheless, here I am. I'm going to make up for what's going to be. I'm going to be, at least on paper, one of the worst teams at both third base and shortstop, which I hate, especially when there's only 10 lineups. So I'm going to make sure both of my utility spots are filled with quality bats. And I'm going to double tap first base here, which seems to have been neglected a little. I'm going to go Nate Lowe, as you mentioned, and I'm going to pair him with Christian Walker. Well, he shouldn't have taken Carlos Correa, Chris. What goes around comes around.
Oh, gosh. Well,
That's what I get.
I was thinking about taking Nick Lodolo as a little upside SP4 breakout type, but that won't happen because he is gone. I don't have a first baseman yet either, so I probably should start to look at that position. But yes, we are here into round 11. I'll read off my team. I've got Andres Jimenez, Austin Riley, Francisco Lindor, Eloy Jimenez. I've got both Jimenez guys. I didn't even realize that. Nice. Adolis Garcia, Julio Rodriguez. So lots of combined home runs and steals. The only one that doesn't really contribute is Riley and Eloy Jimenez, but they'll give me a ton of power. And then my starting pitchers, I've got Brandon Woodruff, Joe Musgrove, and Lance Lynn. And I've got Ryan Presley as my lone closer for now. And I think I'm either going to take a first baseman or a catcher.
Yeah, I don't love the first baseman available. Christian Walker, definitely the last of a tier for me. I know I'm a little higher on him, but
There's one out there that Frank likes.
I mean, there's a couple that are worth liking. I just I think there's probably a lot of similarities between the remaining first basemen, so I'm probably okay letting them go.
Yeah, there is a first baseman, and there's still 3 catchers that I have kind of within the same tier. Although it's pretty late for this one guy. Should I take him? We'll see what happens. Let's chance it here. I'm going to go ahead and take Wilson Contreras in the middle of the 11th round. Sean Murphy already gone, so he went ahead of Wilson Contreras. There's a few other catchers left, but this just feels really late for Wilson Contreras, who's now with the St. Louis Cardinals. Much better lineup than he was in last year, at least with the Cubs. First half amazing, second half not. He was playing through some ankle injuries and some trade rumor type stuff that I think probably affected him on the field as well. But I like Wilson Contreras quite a bit, especially if you can get him at a discount. After Nick Lodolo went, Pete Fairbanks, Jeremy Pena, David Bednar went off the board. I took Wilson Contreras, Logan Gilbert, and Lars Nootbaar. I mean, if there's one thing you could bet on every single mock draft, Tim Kanek is in here all the time. He will take Lars Nootbaar and probably 50 spots ahead of ADP just to make sure he gets it.
Is it always him? Is that
Always.
what happens?
Every single draft.
And when we draft with Doug Rowe, last year's podcast winner, Miguel Vargas goes 100 spots above ADP.
Right.
So, they're kind of warping our sense of reality here, those two.
That's true. Nootbaar, someone I also moved up in the rankings, and I think I moved him up to around 170th overall. And maybe that's not high enough. It's at least in these drafts that Tim Kanek is a part of. I will not get Lars Nootbaar. Christian Yelich goes 129th. Just kind of boring, safe play, keep the line moving, give you some stats. Chris, you are up, and where are you going?
Yeah, I view Christian Yelich and Chris Bryant very, very similarly. They're kind of a mini tier at outfield with Christian Yelich going off the board. I'll take Chris Bryant. And I still only have 2 pitchers. So it's and one of them's a reliever. So I only have 2 starters right now. So it's an interesting tack that I'm taking in this one. And I feel okay about it so far. Obviously hitting, very good. Pitching, a little weak.
Hey.
Yeah, well, I mean, but like I've said, and why I've been, until this draft, I guess, pushing the envelope at starting pitcher. Not that I have one of the deepest staffs. I just went deeper than you two. I have yet to come out of a draft this year feeling bad about my pitching staff because there are so many that I like in the mid and even lower tiers.
And this is a format head-to-head categories. 25 innings per week is a very low minimum. It's the kind of league where a lot of the concerns that I have about, Spencer Strider at the high end, but even some of the lower end guys, like not having the innings potential, I don't care as much about it here because, it's not about the total numbers that you put up. You're going to have to fill in across the season anyway. So I think you have more flexibility to build a weaker pitching staff in this format.
After Chris took Chris Bryant, Dustin May and Alexis Diaz go off the board. That is the end of round 11. Chris, any concern with Chris Bryant? Apparently has been dealing with a stiff back the past couple of days, expected to return on Wednesday.
Yeah, a little concerning that he's missed a couple of days in spring with an issue that was, held him back last season. So that's something to keep an eye on. Certainly, you never want to see a guy at the beginning of the season dealing with that kind of injury, although it's worth pointing out that there are more injuries in spring training than any other point in the season. So, the idea that it's the start of the season, it's a bad sign that he's already hurt. Well, that's also just kind of part of spring training, right? This is the first time that these guys are doing this every day since October. Injuries happen.
Yep. And the same thing happened with Anthony Rizzo recently, where he deals with chronic back issues, and he was back in the lineup on Tuesday. I saw he had a pretty hard hit ball too, a very high exit velocity. So hopefully everything good with both Anthony Rizzo and Chris Bryant, but we're paying close attention there. To start round 12, we saw Anthony Santander, who I don't want to overrate World Baseball Classic stats, but man, this guy is locked in. He is crushing the ball right now.
He's having an awesome series. 3 games so far, at least.
Yeah, he's looked awesome. Then CJ Crone, Chris took Kyle Wright, Matt Chapman, Jake McCarthy, and Gleyber Torres. Well, this worked out because I took Wilson Contreras, and I am now going to take that first baseman who Scott was referencing earlier, and it's my man, Rowdy Tellez, who has a few bombs already in spring training. I believe he's playing for Team Mexico in the World Baseball Classic. But
I believe so, yes.
With the shift restrictions this year, I expect the batting average to get, up to around 240-ish, not be a complete drain like it was last year, but, up over 30 home runs, hitting in the middle of that Brewers lineup. Great ballpark to hit in for left-handed power as well. So I take Rowdy Tellez at 139 and Taylor Ward. I think that's a really good value on him, going 140th. Scott, we're coming up on your pick here. Got anything in mind? What are we thinking?
I do have a couple of players in mind, but I'm sure if I say their names, they'll immediately be taken. So I'll keep them to myself. But I like the value for both.
All right, so Scott is still lacking a third baseman and a shortstop. He needs a third outfielder, but as he mentioned last time, he took both Nate Lowe and Christian Walker just to kind of
got taken.
Shore up some of those hitting stats. And the latest couple of picks, Craig Kimbrell, Nestor Cortez, and Steven Kwan. Which player did you want there?
I wanted Nestor Cortez.
Yeah, this is really late for Nestor.
I almost took him with my last pick when I took Powell, right?
Yeah, and I was trying to push it a little. I thought about him last time, but that Red Cross, the fact he hasn't pitched, I don't think he's pitched yet this spring with a hamstring issue, but the expectation is I don't think he's made an official spring start. I think he's made some like minor league starts or whatever. But he's only expected to miss a turn with that injury. So I'm definitely going to take Daniel Bard here. Want a second potentially prolific save source to pair with Emmanuel Clase. And that's another one like Kenley Jansen, where just nobody seems to want him. So I end up with a lot of them. Well below ADP. Not as reliable as Jansen, of course, but had a very good year last year and could potentially do it again. The question is whether I want to go with a starting pitcher here or not. I am thinking I do. Which one? I'm going to go with Charlie Morton. I'm not going to make the same mistake I made in the salary cap draft we recorded last week of passing up Morton, looking that gift horse in the eye, because, again, my ace is Max Fried. I think it's a good idea to target pitchers who have big strikeout upside. And as disappointing as Morton was last year, he had 205 strikeouts. So that is something I feel confident he can do. And of course, I have reasons to believe he's going to bounce back. Apart from that, in addition to having a lot of strikeouts, going to bounce back with the ERA and WHIP and wins and all of that.
I think Charlie Morton is done. I think he stinks. He burned me last year.
Wow.
I mean, I'm a little bit more nervous than Scott is. I get it. 1 year further removed from the broken leg that he suffered the prior year in the World Series. I think that's something that can help Charlie Morton and maybe bounces back to the form we saw in years past. But there was something off with him last year in terms of the command, the control, falling behind in counts, and then just kind of grooving a pitch in there and getting crushed. And
well, that's the thing is like, okay, he's 39 years old. So the assumption is clearly he's on the decline. He's on his way out. But what was off with him wasn't an age-related thing. Velocity wasn't down.
Control could be, though.
3,000 RPM. Yeah, but I'm saying that's a correctable thing. That's not the sort of thing, oh, you're just not capable of throwing strikes anymore because you got too old. Like that's not something you ever hear happening to
He's
a pitcher.
old.
Too old to throw strikes.
Yeah, no, look, I think not having pinpoint accuracy, though, with your pitches, Scott, I think is something that, maybe could come for an older pitcher. So I worry about that a little bit. And everything else you're right about. I mean, I think that's something to watch early on in the season with Morton. Where is the control? Is he struggling with walks? He typically has been a slow starter, but it's something that I want to watch early on in the season with Charlie Morton. After Scott took him, Hunter Renfroe, Yohan Duran, Lucas Giolito, William Contreras. I think it's great value there at 149th. I think Sean Murphy was maybe the first pick of round 10, and William Contreras goes in round 13. I think that's just really good value. I took Jesus Luzardo, Freddie Peralta, Grayson Rodriguez. Chris, you're on deck. I wound up with Jesus Luzardo as my SP4, and things are coming together. I've got him, Woodruff, Lance Lynn, and Joe Musgrove. So I actually kind of like it. Nice. Good job.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I definitely had Jesus Luzardo in my queue. I was hoping that he would be there and I could go a little double tap homer pick. One of them's not a Marlin, but is a former Marlin. That's who I took here. Pablo Lopez, who I did add to my Breakouts 2.0 column. I'm gonna allow myself to overreact just a teeny tiny bit to the big velocity spike that we saw in his most recent start. 2 miles per hour plus is one of the hardest throwing starts he's had in his career. And there were also some other signs there that were interesting. He was throwing his curveball about 20% of the time. He had a sweeper that he's mostly used like a cutter as his primary glove side breaking pitch. He didn't throw a cutter at all in that World Baseball Classic start. It was all forcing fastballs, changeups, curveballs, sweepers, and sinkers. And I think it's an interesting pitch mix. His cutter was his worst pitch last year, so abandoning that could help him unlock something.
I think it's well laid out, Chris. I'm getting more interested in Pablo Lopez myself, who changed teams from the Marlins to the Minnesota Twins, and it seems like they willingly want him to throw this curveball / sweeper more, and it could unlock a new level for Pablo Lopez, especially with the velocity up. I don't know if he'll maintain that, but it was pretty interesting to see him pumping 95, 96 consistently in that World Baseball Classic start. After Chris took Pablo Lopez, we see Nico Horner and Joe Ryan. That is the end of round 13. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to wrap up part 1 here on the podcast, but please hop over to part 2 and join us for the rest of this draft. Welcome back into Fantasy Baseball today. This is part 2 of our live head-to-head categories mock draft, and we are picking up with round 14. The first pick is Jeffrey Springs. Now I'm happy I took Jesus Luzardo because I was debating between those two, and if I passed on both of them and didn't wind up getting one, I would have been pretty upset. So Springs has looked really good so far in the spring. No pun intended there. And he was awesome last season as well. Now, can he go a little bit deeper consistently? Can we get some 6-inning starts out of Jeffrey Springs? That is the question. Scott, close your eyes, close your ears. I'm sorry to announce, but Miguel Vargas has been taken 158th overall.
Hey, I have 3 first basemen already.
That's true.
So
that is true.
I didn't have a lineup spot for him. Obviously, he's expected to pick up eligibility at second base in short order. But yeah, again, one of our drafts, he goes 158th overall. Even without Doug Rowe here, he goes 100 picks ahead of his ADP, which I was amazed to find out doing that ADP review. 253.4 overall. Now, I think a lot of that has to do with he just started getting at bats late last week after having a fractured pinky. He was still playing the field. He was still standing at the plate, holding the bat, watching the pitch go by. But he just started swinging a bat, has been swinging it very well, as I'd expect. And I think he's one of the most undervalued players in drafts. I loved him even when he was going 50 picks earlier than this on average. I thought I wanted him in every league, but now it's just gotten ridiculous. The out of sight, out of mind thing, I guess.
All right.
One thing I do have to point out about Miguel Vargas is I've seen some wow, it's really impressive that he drew walks when he wasn't swinging the bat. And it's well, no, it's not. He wasn't making those choices. He just wasn't swinging. He just wasn't swinging at all. It was not oh, wow, look at the plate discipline here. He just wasn't swinging the bat, guys.
Yeah.
But he does have a very good plate discipline.
He has a good eye as well, in addition to the fact that he walked 4 times while not swinging the bat.
I think it says more about the pitchers.
The quality of competition being faced in the, yes.
So after Miguel Vargas went 158th, this is fun. Back-to-back Mariners relievers. Who will close? Nobody knows. Paul
Matters
Sewald,
less in this format, though.
That is correct. Paul Sewald went to Chris, and then he was followed up by Andres Munoz, Drew Rasmussen, MJ Melendez. Great value, 162nd overall. I took Scott's favorite player in the world, Ahmed Rosario, because I have recently drafted a good amount of power hitters with lower batting average. So I wanted to pick up that batting average and maybe pick up a few more steals as well. Do that with Ahmed Rosario. Sorry,
Frank.
Hey, you waited too long. You have no one to blame but yourself, bud.
Well, you're supposed to wait as long as you can. That's the whole point. Nico Horner went at the end of last round. Of course, his ADP is much lower than Rosario. And this is, again, why I don't like picking late. Because normally it's just Horner goes, I'll take Rosario. Rosario goes, I'll take Horner. But, there's so much time in between that you can't time it perfectly. So I'm going to have to reach a little for my shortstop.
Uh-oh.
It's one of the players I've also talked about being the most undervalued in drafts this year, Ezekiel Tovar of the Rockies, who goes about 230th overall on average. I'm taking him 169th here. But I can't afford to miss out on him. And I think he has 5 category potential since he's playing in Colorado. Certainly he produced like that in the minors last year. A lot of advantages being in that home environment.
Oh, Scott,
fingers crossed it goes like I hope it will.
Couldn't you have taken him one pick later so I could have accurately predicted round 15 Ezekiel Tovar?
When did you predict that?
Round 5, I think. When you didn't get it, I think after I took Carlos Correa, whenever that was.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, do you have a crystal ball? Because man, that was spot on.
Where did you predict that? In our private chat?
No, on the show.
Oh, I guess I wasn't listening.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah.
Okay.
Scott's clearly paying attention to the draft.
I must have been thinking about my pick or something. All right. So Ezekiel Tovar 168, and I'm pairing him with a player who got a lot of buzz today, specifically Reed Detmers of the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, who I already liked as a breakout pick. Of course, I've cited his stats after being sent to the minors midway through last season, working on a slider, came back throwing it harder. And at least by the ratio stats is pretty close to ace-like Reed Detmers. Well, came out today that he is throwing that slider even harder. And that fastball too. His fastball velocity is way up too. He spent the offseason working with drive line baseball. Surprise, surprise. Reed Detmers averaged 93 on his fastball after returning from the minors. It's been 95 to 97 this spring. He averaged 87 on the slider. It's been 89 to 91 this spring. And so that makes for potentially an even bigger breakout than I was expecting. Of course, the downside is 6-man rotation and with the Angels. So in a head-to-head league like this, not going to be able to take advantage of 2-start weeks with Reed Detmers. But I think the 1-start weeks could be impressive enough that I'm happy to get him here in round 15.
Love it. I think Detmers is someone that's going to just continue to rise as we get closer to opening day, and for good reason. Let's catch people up on picks. In round 14, I took Amanda Rosario, then Chris Bassett, Tyler Stevenson, Jose Miranda, Jake Cronenworth, and Scott at the turn took Ezekiel Tovar and Reed Detmers. Now we're into round 15. Alec Boehm, Jeff McNeil, Ketel Marte, Josh Bell. I took Tyler Glasnow, then Kendall Graveman, and Jordan Montgomery. It is pretty risky. I mean, I took Glasnow knowing that I also have Joe Musgrove. It's just so late. It's 174th overall. Stash Glasnow on the bench until he's ready to return. Hopefully, early May, mid-May, something like that. But he will be my SP5 by the time he returns. So I already got Luzardo, I got Musgrove, got Lance Lynn, and also have Brandon Woodruff. I think now was the right time to take that risk-reward chance on Tyler Glasnow. After he goes, I mentioned Kendall Graveman, Jordan Montgomery, Ian Happ, and Chris, your backup. Do you still need pitchers? Probably, right? You're muted.
Yeah, I need some pitching. And since Scott took the breakout starting pitcher that I wanted, I'm going to take a different left-handed breakout starting pitcher, more like a bounce back, Trevor Rogers.
Nice. I know when we were doing breakouts 2.0, we introduced the term re-breakouts, Chris. It's subjective. Can you break out twice? I tend to agree with you. I think you can. And I wrote him up in breakouts 2.0 as someone who I think can get back on track. He's had a good spring. He finished the season strong with like the 2 or 3 starts that he made at the end of the year before getting shut down. So
says his command is better than it ever has been. I think he has 1 walk so far in the spring, which is a good sign. Spent the offseason working on a sinker. We'll see how that goes. Also working to increase the break on his slider because he's got one of those sliders, especially last season, that it was mostly vertical movement. There wasn't a whole lot of horizontal drop on it. And, given the fact that his changeup is such a valuable pitch for him, I think he probably needs a little differentiation there, a little, horizontal movement. So I'm excited by what we've seen so far from him in the spring, and just think he's a super talented pitcher.
After Chris took Trevor Rogers, Mitch Haniger at 179, Eugenio Suarez, the last pick of round 15. Scott, I know that Mitch Haniger is dealing with an oblique strain right now. We don't know if he's going to be ready for opening day, but this is clearly later than he has been going does this sound like the right range for Mitch Haniger?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have him ranked here. There are a couple of outfielders who I'm surprised haven't been taken yet that I would have taken instead. I've never been excited to draft Haniger. I think there's a lot of volatility there, health related, and he's in a bad park, and plays for a manager who likes to mix up lineups a lot. I suspect Haniger's not going to fall into that as much as other hitters in that lineup, but it still raises the concern. And in the end, even if everything goes right, you might get a 250 hitting 25 homer guy. So was it really worth it? I don't know.
To kick off round, go ahead.
It's a low ceiling player and low ceiling investment, Haniger, I would say.
Yeah, I still think there is some upside there. I mean, we saw a couple of years ago, near 40 home run season. That's not the expectation, but just to know he has that capability in the bag, it's like, all right, maybe he can give us like 30 plus home runs. Not that I'm expecting it again. To kick off round 16, JD Martinez, Anthony Rendon, and Chris, you took Tony Gonsolin, 183rd overall, dealing with an ankle injury. They're saying they're going to kind of slow roll it with Tony Gonsolin. Was really good when he pitched last year. But on top of that, he also kind of has this like forearm thing that he was dealing with. So lots of concern, but when he's on the mound, he's been really, really good.
Yeah, I expect him to be very good when he's on the mound. And like I said earlier, I think in this format, that might have been on the previous podcast, actually. In this format, I'm less concerned about players with innings issues because you're going week by week anyway. So I feel pretty good about him.
After Tony Gonsolin, Andrew Heaney, Hunter Brown. It's a nice pick there, 185th overall. Brandon Nimmo, one of 8 or 10 players to score 100 plus runs last year was Brandon Nimmo. I am on the clock. And all right, let's see. I still have a utility spot open. There was a hitter I saw earlier. There he goes. And I haven't wound up with him yet in any drafts. And it's about time. I got Riley Green, someone I think we kind of collectively like here on the podcast, 187th overall.
Good pick.
That fills out my entire hitting squad, so I'm going to have to focus on some pitchers the rest of the way. But he's been crushing the ball in spring. And speaking of which, you should be reading Scott's spring training roundup that comes out every week. And in that, you talked about how Riley Green's swing feels perfect right now and that it's completely leveled and not hitting as many ground balls this spring and hitting the ball really hard. He's been posting some really big exit velocity. So I'm getting more excited about Riley Green this season.
So I didn't have the most up-to-date information because StatCast isn't available at every spring training stadium, but something like he had already hit 8 balls, 105 plus miles per hour, and 7 of them were off the ground, which putting the ball on the ground last year was something that was difficult for him. Now, he hasn't tried to improve his launch angle, but he's focused on putting backspin on the ball. And, whatever works. It's kind of an old school way of thinking about hitting, but that's not necessarily wrong. And he's putting up not just big stats, but big data here this spring is Riley Green. And Mike Q is just getting plundered here.
One thing when we talk about like swing changes, and a lot of the times when we're talking about those kind of changes that players make, I've used Christian Yelich as an example where he talked about how he said he wasn't trying to hit the ball in the air more. He was trying to meet the ball farther along in his swing when his swing is already on the upswing, because he hits the ball really hard already. And so, a lot of it is like when Riley Green talks about hitting the ball with backspin, a lot of these are more like hitting cues, like for me, when he says trying to hit the ball with backspin, that means more like trying to get under the ball. It's not necessarily like I'm trying to, uppercut swing it. It's just I'm trying to hit the ball at a different place. And I think that's something to keep in mind when, this guy needs to hit the ball differently, but he didn't change his swing. Well, those changes can still happen, especially when a player's as young and inexperienced as Riley Green is.
After I took Riley Green, Ty France, then Andrew Vaughn. That's good value on Vaughn, 189th overall. Brian Hayes, Edward Cabrera, love it. And Scott, you know what? Look, for waiting till the last pick of round 16 to come away with Javier Baez as your starting shortstop.
Oh, he's not.
Oh, he's not, right. You took Tovar. Well, that's
he's insurance for Ezekiel Tovar. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Perfect. Yeah. Okay. This late in the draft, why not? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I feel okay about my shortstop situation, all things considered. But like the problem is I'm kind of duct taping it together while also just having to settle for crap at third base. And this is why I have to get a third baseman in round 2, because this always happens when I don't. I just end up with total sludge there. I'm not willing to reach quite early enough for the few scattered, exciting choices. And I didn't even necessarily need an exciting choice this time. We saw, just since my last pick, we saw Alec Boehm, Eugenio Suarez, Anthony Rendon, and most recently Brian Hayes all go off the board. And that's it. Like there's nothing left that is worth paying up for on any level. Not that I was about to take Brian Hayes. He was the last of them, 2 picks before my pair of picks here. I don't even like Brian Hayes that much, but it's like, okay, well, maybe there's some untapped upside there. He hits the ball pretty hard. I know some people are still high on him. It'll at least give me some stolen bases, but he's gone too. So it's just like, I'll take whatever's left at third base and probably be stuck with crap there all year because there's just not enough upside plays.
After Scott just disappeared out of nowhere. I hope everything is all right. After Scott took Javier Baez, he took Scott Barlow, Brady Singer, went Patrick Sandoval, Alex Cobb, Oscar Colas, 197th. There was a bunch of prospects sent down, reassigned to minor league camp on Tuesday, and Oscar Colas was not one of them. So that makes me feel pretty good about his chances of making the White Sox. I took Evan Phillips, 198th overall. I'll explain that in a second.
I hate that pick.
Which one?
Evan Phillips, because I wanted him.
So you mentioned this earlier, Chris, with Paul Sewald and Andres Munoz, where ideally you want your reliever to earn saves. But if they don't, in a format like this, head-to-head categories, you just kind of plug them in your lineup, continue to rack up good ratios and strikeouts. And Daniel Hudson is really the only other reliever I really worry about. There could be other names, but Hudson getting saves for the Dodgers, and he's dealing with still knee and ankle issues, probably not going to be ready for opening day. Evan Phillips was amazing for the Dodgers last year, so I'm just taking the shot here that he could start off as the closer, and if he does really well in that role, maybe he just kind of runs with it all season. So I don't know if you had anything different to add to that, Chris.
No, that's exactly the thought process here, is that I'm not so concerned about saves, but I do want to get a bunch of good relief pitchers to give myself some flexibility in how I handle my pitching staff, because I've got enough starters now that I feel okay about. I could probably use a couple more, but yeah, I would like to have had a very good reliever who's got save chances, and there's not a ton of those guys left.
After I took Evan Phillips, Jose Urquidy, Tyler Mahle, who has looked pretty good so far this spring. I think he had a not so great start recently. After Mahle, Luis Garcia, Chris, you took Seiya Suzuki, Jack Flaherty, and Vaughn Grissom. So you also have Bryce Harper, Chris. Are you worried about having to stash 2 guys to start the season in Suzuki and Harper?
No, because Suzuki is not going to be gone for as long, and I'm assuming we would have IL spots if we played this league out, so I'm not too concerned about that. There will be guys to pick up in free agency, so if you do have IL spots, I think it's a way to take advantage of that, yeah.
All right, the first pick of round 18 is Jared Kelenic at 205th. Moved him up quite a bit in the rankings update as well. Scott, does this sound like the right range for Kelenic?
Yeah, I'm. Once we get past pick 200, and we are here with pick 205, I just say get whatever upside play appeals to you. Now, maybe in a 15-team league or deeper, it'd be a little more cautious than that, because you can't afford to leave too many RBI and run vacuums in your lineup. But in a 12-team league like this, particularly just 3 outfielder, there are going to be alternatives who can just kind of compile for you. They're going to be available to you off waivers.
And I like that next pick too. Oscar Gonzalez, someone I wrote up in Sleepers 2.0. Just an interesting blend of makes a lot of contact, hits the ball decently hard, has a 31 homer season in the minors, and low key, he's fast. Really good sprint speed for Oscar Gonzalez. I don't know if he'll run, but there's a possibility with the new rules. So maybe he can chip in a little bit there too. Chris, you're on the clock with 5 seconds left.
Yeah, and I'm taking Joey Meneses. He's not someone I've drafted at all this year, but I think it was it Scott on the podcast a couple days ago talking about I think
it was off the podcast.
But the possibility, like, what if this guy is somewhat for real? He's been really good in the World Baseball Classic. Also, I'm watching it currently. Mexico's jerseys are incredible. I did not realize they have like a pink and baby blue jersey. It's so cool looking. But also, this dude, Harry Ford, has been like one of the players of the tournament for Great Britain, just had a double. I think he had a 2-homer game. Top catching prospect for the Seattle Mariners. I think Scott, he's like 50th in your rankings coming into the season. This is totally unrelated to what we're talking about, but I just wanted to throw it out there.
Like a 20-year-old catcher prospect. He's too good to catch. Like he's kind of Mookie Betts like, I feel like, in terms of his offensive potential. And I'd like to see them move him off catcher, the Mariners. I don't know if it's going to happen, but he is not the top catcher prospect, but the most exciting catcher prospect is somebody who should get on base a ton, steal bases, if for average, probably if for power.
The comp I love anytime there's an athletic catcher who gets on base is Jason Kendall.
He should be better. I mean, Kendall had a long productive career. Kendall had a long productive career, but he should be like
show some respect,
contribute in a wider variety of ways than Kendall did.
Well, a rabbit hole on Harry Ford actually started with Joey Meneses as the pick to Chris at 207th overall, followed by Ryan Mountcastle, Oswald Peraza, who hit a home run on Tuesday night. He's trying to fight off Volpe. We'll see what happens there. Alex Lang, the supposed hopeful closer for the Detroit Tigers. I took John Gray, just another upside starting pitcher that I can play the matchups with. In him, Masataka Yoshida at 212th. Tristan Casas, all right, little Red Sox hitter run. Josh Young, very late, 214th overall. Not bad. And Scott, we're making our way back to you. Will Smith goes. All right, so I think some people might have saw my tweet the other day about Will Smith being reunited with Bruce Bochy. Scott does not buy it one bit, but I think there might be something there.
I would definitely still take Leclerc over Smith.
I agree with that.
Smith was not very good last year. Smith was not very good the year he closed for the Braves, and he was perfect in the postseason that year, but he was not very good just in a general closer sense, was constantly on the verge of losing his job. So I think even if Will Smith starts out in the role because Leclerc is banged up, which I don't think is a given, I don't think it'll last long. All right, so I'm up here for 2. I still have an outfield opening. Still have a third base opening, but screw that. I'm going to take 2 outfielders that I try to take in every category's draft, Garrett Mitchell and Jake Fraley, who I think both have considerable upside and speed too. Both of them. Mitchell has a ton of speed. Mitchell, if he stays healthy and hits well enough to stay in the lineup, I think 40 steals easily. He stole 8, I believe, in 30-something games for the Brewers last year. But Fraley didn't run so much last year, but he's certainly shown the ability to do that in the past. Of course, it's going to be easier to steal bases this year. He's been running a lot in spring training, and he was very productive after coming back from a knee injury in the middle of last year. Really seemed to benefit from playing in Cincinnati after playing in Seattle previously. So I have Mitchell and Fraley both as big breakout possibilities in the outfield and multi-category contributors in the outfield as well.
Scott, knowing everything you know now and that you don't have a third baseman yet, would you think more about potentially taking Jose Ramirez over Aaron Judge when you have the first overall pick like you did in this draft?
I don't think so. I mean, it happened last year, right? Judge could hit twice as many home runs as Ramirez. And I don't like, even if he regresses this year, even if he regresses by 10 home runs, he could have twice as many home runs as Ramirez did. I just think there's such a difference there in terms of ceiling. No, I don't think I would. I think people are factoring in way too much regression for Judge because, he'll never hit 62 home runs again. Okay, but what if he hits 52? Like, that seems very likely. He's done it before, apart from the 62 homer season. So no, I think I'd still take Judge number one.
All right. After you took Jake Fraley, we see a couple of Reds hitters go in a row. Will Myers, then Noah Syndergaard, Luis Arise, Kyle Finnegan. I took Jose Leclerc. Yes, I think there's a chance Will Smith could steal some saves there, but I agree with Scott. I still would take Leclerc first, but just for, deeper formats, draft and hold leagues, Will Smith, I think, is a name that you should know. The disrespect finally ends. I mean, nobody wants Jonathan India. 223rd overall. I mean, if I knew what I know now, I wouldn't have taken Andres Gimenez back in like round 9 or 10 or whatever. I'd just wait forever and then take Jonathan India. After that, Daniel Hudson, Nathan Eovaldi, Chris takes Jesse Winker, and Merrill Kelly. So start of the Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, somebody even said it in the chat, Mount Rushmore run. That's a terrible nickname because it's not. It requires so much explanation, right?
It's just that they're old.
That's
there's got to think
that's not why I called them.
No, you know what? Executive decision. We're changing the name. You know what we're going to call them?
Okay.
They're the Golden Girls.
But they're not girls.
But they're golden.
They're golden.
And more importantly, they're old.
Plus, I can make
in the prime of their lives, notably.
I can make a sound drop out of that too, Chris. So I think we're onto something here.
Thank you for being a friend, Merrill Kelly.
But Mount Rushmore is actually catching on. It's ridiculous that it's catching on because it's such a bad nickname. But
I think Golden Girls will catch on just as quickly.
Let us know. Let us know in the comments on YouTube. Should we call Scott's group of 4? I guess you could call them boring pitchers. It's
the 4 boring pitchers who figured out what it takes to succeed in a post-juice ball league.
Scott, you're not allowed to say those words on the podcast anymore.
I am very much allowed.
Memo, but
one angry tweeter is not going to stop me from saying juice ball era.
We are now going with the JBE, and we're just leaving it at that.
No, I hate acronyms. We're not doing that. Juice ball era.
Let us know in the comments. Say it again, Scott. Let us know in the comments. Do you want us to go with the Golden Girls or the Mount Rushmore for Scott's group of 4 starting pitchers there? And before we catch you up on the picks, let's take another break here in part 2 of this live mock draft.
At stake, the chance to put on the iconic green jacket. So golfers, are you ready? Go!
It's a tradition unlike any other. The Masters on CBS.
CBS Fantasy Baseball Commissioner lets you run your league your way with endless ways to customize your scoring, rosters, schedule, and more. I think I have to pause this read to make a pick. I totally forgot that I was about to be on the clock. So let's see who I want to take. I'm going to go ahead and take Sonny Gray, who there's been some good news about so far in the spring. Anywho, again, CBS Sports Fantasy Baseball Commissioner lets you run your league your way with endless ways to customize your scoring, roster, schedule, and more. With CBS Sports Commissioner, you can cut out the loopholes and arguments and play exactly how your league wants to. Customize the rules from roto, head-to-head points or categories, salary cap or snake drafts, keepers, contracts, draft pick trading, and multiple matchups per period. The league history is unlike any other fantasy site with a record book, all-time standings, year-by-year results, and more. So step up to the big leagues this season. Visit cbssports.com/FBT to get a special offer when you start a new Commissioner League today. Again, that's cbssports.com/FBT. We are in round 20, and the latest picks: Matthew Boyd, Martin Perez, Rowanzi Contreras, love it, Chris, Alex Wood, Brandon Drury, Cody Bellinger. I took Sonny Gray, and then Jose Barrios and Sean Manaea. Man, I mean, one bad WBC start for Jose Barrios, and he is just plummeting down draft boards, even worse than he was.
He looked awful. And it's kind of like Charlie Morton, where like there wasn't like a really good explanation for why he struggled so much last season. There was like his spin rate and velocity were mostly the same. It was just like he just wasn't commanding anything. He was leaving his fastball up, and he was just getting clobbered. And that's what it looked like against.
I think it's worth pointing out his ADP is 210.
Yeah.
So 236 is lower than that, but it's not.
2 whole rounds, Scott.
By the way,
this late
is
in the draft.
Tyler Anderson one of the Golden Girls? Am I remembering? Is that the fourth one?
Yeah, he's one of
part of the Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. Mount Rushmore, yes.
I'm not calling them Golden Girls.
I don't know. I kind of like it. Let us know in the YouTube comments or tweet at us. Golden Girls or Mount Rushmore?
We're doing a Twitter poll.
Scott, we're going to get to your picks in just a second. I wanted to bring up a note about Sonny Gray, which I read in the Mining the News article, which if you don't read them, you absolutely should be reading them. Really great articles from Jeff Zimmerman over at Rotographs. Last year, Sonny Gray was not ready for the start of the season because the holdout, he kind of fell behind, and he said that led to some of his injuries. He came out the spring, and he was either throwing harder or got a bunch of whiffs on his breaking pitches. And look, this late in the draft, I'll take a shot on Sonny Gray, but I think there is reason for some optimism when it comes to Sonny Gray. And Scott, with that, you wind up with one of your favorite pitchers, Miles Michaelis.
Yeah, one of the Mount Rushmore. I'm in such good shape in this draft for pitching that I'm not as concerned about getting them. Tyler Anderson's still out there. I could go with him, but I think I'm going to try for some upside. Maybe even an outside shot. This guy gains third base eligibility. And that's Anthony Volpe.
I was thinking about taking him.
Yeah, I mean, so we know Isaiah Kiner-Falefa is not going to be the shortstop. That we got confirmation of that today. Aaron Boone said they're going to work him in center field because he's transitioning to a utility role. He did not suggest who was going to take Kiner-Falefa's place at shortstop. Of course, Oswald Peraza, who hasn't been taken here, is entered as the favorite. But he has been kind of banged up this spring, hasn't done a lot when he's played. Volpe continues to set the world on fire. And notably, he didn't get optioned on a day when Christian Encarnacion Strand did, Ian Anderson did, Bryce Elder did, Anthony Volpe did not. So he is, I think, truly in the running for a job here. And I know scouting reports suggested third base might actually be his best position. And what are the odds Josh Donaldson holds up all year? So I'm going to start with the crappy third baseman, no matter who it is. Ryan McMahon just got taken. Oh, well. But Anthony Volpe gives me the chance of maybe at some point not having a crappy third baseman.
The start of round 21, Scott took Anthony Volpe, then Jorge Lopez, Ramon Laureano, Ryan McMahon, and Kyle Bradish, someone who has looked great in spring training as well. And he's generating some buzz as a sleeper in the fantasy baseball industry as well. And
RJ White has chimed in with a potential name for that group. We may have to redo the poll because I think the Expendables is a pretty great name too.
That is really good. All right.
Explain it to me. I'm not sure I get it.
Movie that I think Arnold Schwarzenegger was in it, and Bruce Willis, a bunch of old action stars from 10 years ago. That I never saw it, but that's old.
Okay, so it was a bunch of has-beens.
That's rude.
Well, I'm saying if it was Barrios and Flaherty, if that's the group we were talking about, then maybe that would make more sense. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want to lose the momentum of Mount Rushmore. Really catching on.
Well, I mean,
the streets are ablaze.
We found a movie that I saw that you guys haven't seen, and B, it doesn't surprise me that it's a terrible movie.
I haven't seen it either, Frank.
Yeah, I mean, you probably shouldn't. It's a really bad movie. So,
like Space Jam.
Oh my gosh! I mean, Chris, I didn't get your take on the Space Jam debacle, but we did a mailbag last week, and it was me, Welsh, and Scott. And Scott just had he had an Azer take. He's out on Space Jam. Said it wasn't good at the time, and
I'm saying as a movie, it's forgettable, and I'm not sure why it's revered in this way that it deserves a sequel 20 years later.
A movie that includes Michael Jordan, the Looney Tunes, Bill Murray, is a
Yeah,
forgettable movie.
I understand it was a promotional it was a promotional event that they made a movie around. That's not the best way of phrasing it. I had a good phrasing the other day, but it's not coming to mind right now.
It is.
You know,
It's a cynical enterprise. I think it's fair to say the genesis of Space Jam was not, hey, let's make the best movie we can possibly make. That wasn't the thought.
Let's get Michael Jordan with
Jam
the
2.
Looney Tunes and try and write a script around it, and surely people will come to see it and buy a lot of merchandise for it. And that's what happened. But predictably, the movie was just...
Yeah, it's not a great movie. I
think I agree. This is not an Oscar-nominated movie, and I don't think anyone's saying it is, but it is a
people revere it, Frank.
It is a great,
fun movie. I could say this is an average movie that we really shouldn't still be talking about to the extent that we do.
Let's catch people up outside of Scott's bad takes. Carlos Estevez, I took him because I'm just trying to load up on relievers that can maybe grab me some saves here at the end of the draft. Andrew Benintendi. Why was I about to say Andrew? That was weird. Hayden Wesneski. Nice. I wrote him up in Sleepers 2.0. Sir Anthony Dominguez, Jamison Tyone, Chris, Yandy Diaz, and John Birdie. Is this next round the final round of the draft? No, we've got 2 more to go. Okay. Jamison Tyone, Chris, I know he's someone you've talked up as a sleeper. I haven't really been paying attention to him in spring to see what he's been doing, but
I have not seen that either. But the case for him as a sleeper, in case you haven't heard it, is he's got good control, good ground ball rates, hasn't really been a strikeout pitcher, but he's introducing a sweeper to his arsenal this offseason with the intention of getting more swings and misses. I think it could be the put away pitch that he's been looking for, and I'm intrigued by the possibilities here.
All right, so his most recent start last week, March 9th, he gave up 4 runs, and
it's less than ideal.
Obviously, we're not paying too much attention for like veterans in spring training, but I guess if we saw them doing better, obviously that would be a good thing. A couple of relievers go off the board here, round 22, Michael King and Brock Burke. Not necessarily relievers that are going to get you saves, but guys that you could plug in and get you hopefully good ratios and really good strikeouts as well. Chris, with the homer pick, you go ahead and take Dylan Floro.
Love Dylan Floro.
No, you don't.
No, just it's a closer or a possible closer. Yeah.
A possible closer, yeah. Skip Schumacher, new manager of the Marlins, has already said that they are going to go with a closer by committee. Some of their relievers have been banged up this spring, but they recently made their debuts. It was AJ Puck and Tanner Scott, and Matt Barnes has been pitching in spring. So they've got about 4 different names that could wind up grabbing saves here for the Miami Marlins. And that's an annoying pick because I wanted to draft Brendan Pfaadt, who is a pitching prospect with the Diamondbacks. That name is spelled Pfaadt if you're looking him up. Really good numbers in the minors last year. Actually led the entire minors in strikeouts. He went 6+ innings a bunch of times. So seems like he's ready to pitch in the majors. Just they have a few other names there out in Arizona with Dre Jamison and Ryan Nelson. Frankly, I think they should just kind of give up on the Zach Davies thing and probably go with multiple of these prospects. But what do I know? I'm going to go ahead and take another reliever here. There was a report that came out on Tuesday that the Cubs apparently view Michael Fulmer and Brad Boxberger as the leading candidates to pick up saves in the 9th inning. So I drafted Michael Fulmer.
Yeah.
Somebody else, feel free to draft Brad Boxberger. I will not be taking both of them.
I think between the two, Fulmer's the one to take because when they signed him, they brought up the possibility of him being the closer, but he said he kind of inferred from that conversation that he had to earn it. But like as part of the courting him process, the fact they tipped their hand that's what they would like Fulmer to do, I think is pretty revealing. Of course, we don't know what the courting process was like with Boxberger, but still.
Yep. A couple other picks after I took Fulmer. Kenta Maeda, love it. Nice little sleeper pick, bounce back candidate for the Twins. Michael Conforto, way too late, 261. Spoke about him the other day. Made some changes to his swing and he hasn't played in a while. I get that, but looks to be healthy so far. He's got 4 home runs this spring, and so not the greatest park, I guess, for left-handed power out in San Francisco, but we'll see with Michael Conforto. Scott, we're coming up on your pick, and those will be your last 2 picks of the draft.
They will. Yeah. And I'd like to have 3 more picks, to be honest. There's one thing I planned on doing that I don't think I'm going to be able to do now. And that is pair Aroldis Chapman with Scott Barlow. Scott Barlow, I think, is the most vulnerable of the presumed closers, of the ones who we really think, okay, this is the closer. And after signing Aroldis Chapman, the Royals GM said Scott Barlow is our closer. So I think it's fair to say he is a closer. But of the ones of the closers, Scott Barlow is the most vulnerable, because why would a rebuilding team like the Royals sign Chapman to a 1-year deal if not to potentially flip him at the deadline? And the best way to resuscitate his value is by giving him safe chances. So I think mostly he just has to prove he's deserving of those chances, because he didn't with the Yankees last year. But if he does, he'll be at least a constant annoyance for Scott Barlow. So I drafted Barlow thinking I'd take Chapman with my last pick, but Tyler Anderson's still there. So I'm going to take the last of the Mount Rushmore. And
thank you for being a friend.
My final pick is going to be my third baseman.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to fill the spot with Brett Beatty for now. And just, if he, in the off chance he's able to win the job for the Mets, because at least there's upside there. And if he doesn't, I'll pick up Eduardo Escobar or Justin Turner or whatever scrubby guy I can pick up to fill that spot. But I'll give myself a chance with Beatty of hopefully getting something more than scrubby there.
I was watching the Mets earlier today. Brett Beatty, he's put on some muscle, man. He looks a lot bigger than I remember seeing him last year, and he's performed really well this spring. So perhaps playing his way into a job there. He could play third, maybe Escobar at DH, and they talked about maybe using Escobar in left field. Clearly, they want to find a way to get Brett Beatty's bat in the lineup, and frankly, I don't blame the Mets. A couple other picks here in round 23: Travis d'Arnaud, Ranger Suarez, Danny Jimenez, and Ha-Sung Kim, who's hit some home runs out there in the World Baseball Classic as well. I'm going to take my last starting pitcher. It's Ross Stripling, someone I talk about a lot as a sleeper. Leaned into his changeup last year. It's a really good pitch, and he was awesome in the second half. Now moves over to the Giants. Great ballpark to pitch in, obviously. So I do like Ross Stripling. Definitely like him as my last pick in the draft. Lance McCullers, who you can stash on the IL and wait for him to return. He's recently started a throwing program, so hopefully some good news on him, unless, of course, you like Hunter Brown, of course. After Lance McCullers, Jock Peterson, Trevor May. Chris, you took DJ LeMahieu and Gabriel Moreno. Yeah, 2 picks that I like there. Lots of eligibility with DJ LeMahieu. Hit a home run on Tuesday, and when he plays, he could be the leadoff man for the Yankees as well.
Yep, I think, like, who was it? The Salvador Perez with the wrist injury last year. I think there's a very clear delineation for DJ LeMahieu when he started playing poorly, and it was when he had the toe injury. He tried to play through it, clearly didn't work out for him. But before that, he was having a season somewhere between, 2021 and not 2021. He was not good, right? Am I remembering the timeline? It was 2020. He was awesome. 2019, he was very good. It was like somewhere between 2021 and 2019. I think he can still be, DJ LeMahieu can still be a very useful fantasy option, especially in that lineup.
What are they going to do with all those infielders? Even if they only take one of Peraza and Volpe with them to New York, and even if Isaiah Kiner for left is just a bench bat, they still have one too many infielders, So yeah. I get the impression LeMahieu is going to play quite a bit. If he's not playing every day, is he going to be productive enough to factor? If it's not literally every day, and I have doubts about that.
They're trying to find ways, Scott. I know that the Yankees have tried Aaron Judge in left field so that they could play Stanton in right because right field is smaller in Yankee Stadium. But now with this Bader injury, I guess they could play, Judge in center, or they've got some options. They've got, Kiner Falefa out there and Oswaldo Cabrera. It's a good problem for them to have. I'm frankly still surprised that they haven't made a trade to this point.
Well, and it's the Yankees. There will probably be an injury at some point. I feel pretty confident in saying this is not a team that has a great track record when it comes to keeping their best players on the field. So, I mean, obviously that injury could be to DJ LeMahieu, but I think these things, like if DJ LeMahieu hits, they'll figure it out. If he doesn't hit, then I'm going to drop him either way.
Yeah.
But I do think like he's going to play enough if he's good enough.
And the last pick of the draft, Mr. Irrelevant, is Brendan Donovan, who could lead off against right-handed pitching, and he's looked pretty good so far this spring as well. Let's take our final break, and when we return, we'll recap our teams here on Fantasy Baseball Today.
To the ones who said we couldn't, that our dreams were too big.
We had to think big, really change things.
We carry fire in our hearts. So don't doubt us. And don't stand in our way. We are your leaders, your allies, your sisters.
All voices belong.
And we are phenomenal.
Anything is possible.
Women who move mountains. Explore the collection on Paramount+.
Let's recap our teams, and we'll start with Scott, who is drafting first overall. And he wound up with Salvador Perez, Pete Alonso, Jose Altuve, Brett Beatty, and Ezekiel Tovar in the infield.
Catcher, first base, second base. Oh, that's great. Brett Beatty. Yeah.
That was exactly my thought while I was reading it. I was like, wow, this team is really good.
That's that.
Let's get into the outfield. Aaron Judge, Cedric Mullins, Garrett Mitchell, 2 utility bats, Christian Walker and Nate Lowe. So that helps pick things back up. On the pitching side, Robbie Ray, Max Fried, Charlie Morton, Chris Sale, Reed Detmers as the starting pitchers. Your relievers in the lineup, you've got Emmanuel Clase, Daniel Bard, and Scott Barlow. On the bench, you've got some fun as well. Javier Baez, 2 of the Mount Rushmore, Tyler Anderson, Miles Michaelis, and then Jake Fraley and Anthony Volpe. What do you think, Scott? I know I asked you the question about Judge versus Jose Ramirez. Was there another chance for you to grab a third baseman that you kind of wish you did? What do you think about the team?
Well, I really hate that I have a black hole at third base, and that always seems to happen when I don't prioritize it early. And it wasn't my fault in this draft. Picking first, unless I took Jose Ramirez first overall, my only chance of getting a stud third baseman was if Nolan Arenado made it to the end of round 2, which he normally does, but you can't be certain that he will. If he did, I definitely would have taken him, but he didn't. So I was on this path of trying to mitigate damage at third base for the entire draft, and it just never worked out, in part because picking at the end, there were a couple of third base runs that I missed out on. So I think I approached it the best way I could, considering I kept missing out. The strength, where I have more than I usually have because of that lack of third base, I think is starting pitcher. I'm deeper and higher in there than I normally am. My top 3, I know we haven't got to it yet. My top 3, oh, you did talk about it. Max Fried, Robbie Ray, Chris Sale, and then having Charlie Morton, Reed Detmers there as 4 or 5. Like there's more upside there than I normally get. I don't have any of the Mount Rushmore in my starting lineup, for instance. Only a couple on my bench. I'd rather have the stud third baseman. So looking back, I took Robbie Ray and Chris Sale back to back in, let me see, what round was that? Sale, that was 8-9. And then who was the next third baseman to go off the board? Jordan Walker, who I would have felt much better about slotting at that position. So I probably just should have been a little more aggressive for Walker rather than taking the 2 starting pitchers there, given that my pitching is probably it's more than I usually get and more than I think I'm going to need. Certainly there are going to be options emerging on waivers. Can't say that about third base. So I'm praying for a miracle there with Brett Beatty. And if it doesn't work out, I'm just going to have to ride a scrub. Maybe I'll be able to work a trade with the pitching surplus. I mean, I potentially may have ended up with a shortstop surplus since I have Ezequiel Tovar as my starter there, Javier Baez and Anthony Volpe both on my bench. Obviously, I need only one of those guys to work out. One of them works out, and there's a good chance all three of them do. And if that's the case, I might have an opportunity to make a trade down the line. But I'd much rather just have somebody good at third base than it be this big eyesore like it is. So overall, I like my team, but that wart is a glaring wart. And that's what I try to avoid in every draft because it's so easy to do at that position.
Frankly, I thought you'd be tilting more, Scott, so I'm a little bit disappointed, but at the same time, I'm happy that you like your team. So let's slide over to Chris.
Sort of.
Let's slide over to Chris's team. He was drafting 10th overall on this one. Starting with catcher Dalton Varsho, followed up by Joey Meneses at first base, Ozzy Albies, Rafael Devers, Wander Franco, that's the infield. In the outfield, Chris Bryant, Yordan Alvarez, Michael Harris, with Carlos Correa and Jesse Winker as the two utility bats. At starting pitcher, Dylan Cease, Kyle Wright, Roansy Contreras, Trevor Rogers, Pablo Lopez, Tony Gonsolin. Couple of relievers, you wound up with Jordan Romano and Paul Sewald. On the bench, you've got DJ LeMahieu, Jamison Tyone, Bryce Harper, Dylan Floro, and Seiya Suzuki. Do you think, in hindsight, Chris, obviously Joey Meneses, maybe it could work out at first base. Like that,
Yeah.
That's a potential need. And starting pitcher, would you have done anything differently with those two positions?
Yeah, I probably could have invested a little more in starting pitcher, and maybe the Bryce Harper pick around 100 overall was a little overly aggressive or maybe too cute. The one thing I would say is, like, I've got Bryce Harper, I've got Seiya Suzuki, I've got Carlos Correa, I've got Jesse Winker between like four players for like utility, basically. None of them are first base eligible. So Joey Meneses and DJ LeMahieu are the only first baseman on my roster. And I think it'll work out with between those two guys. Meneses is a bit of an upside power play. LeMahieu, I think, is just kind of a safe overall hitter. I wish I had a better first baseman on the roster. I wish, given the utility depth that I have, I wish one of them had first base eligibility, or at least a path to first base eligibility. So, overall, I love my offense, and that makes sense because I went heavy on offense in this draft. But just like in terms of positional flexibility, I think that's probably the one place that I'm a little lacking here.
And I partially screwed you the way you screwed me at shortstop.
Yes.
Taking Carlos Correa for one of your utility spots. I took two first basemen back to back for both of my utility spots, Nate Lowe and Christian Walker. I didn't do it to screw you. I did it because they both lasted a lot longer than they normally do.
It was just a nice side effect.
So at that point, I already knew I had a problem at shortstop and third base. So I wanted to make sure my utility players were as impactful as possible. So these two big bats that lasted a lot longer than they normally do. And so I just took them. So I thought
I was gearing up to take Christian Walker with my next pick too.
Yeah. Yep.
And I would feel better about my team if I had Christian Walker instead of, I don't know who I ended up taking there. Let me see if I can. I ended up with Chris Bryant. Like, I would feel better if I had Christian Walker at first base and, a comparable outfielder instead.
But, I like, just from like a build perspective, I haven't really addressed the category balance amid all the positional talk. I got some huge sluggers in Salvador Perez, Pete Alonso, Altuve for his position as a big slugger, Judge, of course, and then Walker and Lowe in my utility spots. And yet I still got stolen base threats. I mean, Judge and Altuve will provide a fair amount themselves, but I have Garrett Mitchell in my lineup, Cedric Mullins. I mean, they might combine for 70 to 80 steals, those two. Ezequiel Tovar should be a base stealer. Any of the three shortstops I drafted by is or Volpe, I'll probably get steals out of that spot. So I feel really good about the balance of for not investing as much in hitting, or I shouldn't say that because my first 4 or 5 picks were all hitters. But for maybe going a little maybe going after starting pitcher a little earlier than I do, I still think the hitting came out really impressive for my team.
Let's wrap up with my team that I drafted 6th overall, and starting with Wilson Contreras at catcher, Rowdy Tellez, Andres Jimenez, Austin Riley, and Francisco Lindor in the infield. In the outfield, Eloy Jimenez, Adolis Garcia, Julio Rodriguez, and my 2 utility bats were Ahmed Rosario and Riley Green. You know, I feel like I invested in hitters early, but it feels like there's something lacking. Maybe it's just name value or star power, whatever it might be. I think it's okay. I think it's balanced. I'm trying to see. Maybe it's a little light on power, but not really. Got Rowdy Tellez. I don't know. What do you guys think about the offense there?
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's a lot of kind of across the board contributors as opposed to guys who will be hugely impactful in one area, you know?
Yeah.
So maybe that's what.
How many like definite 30 home run guys are here?
Riley
and Lindor probably, but not a guarantee. Eloy, not a guarantee. You know, so like
Tellez probably, but not a guarantee.
Yeah, Julio Rodriguez probably, but not a guarantee. Like there's a lot of like 25 to 30 homer guys here rather than like 30 to 35. But you know, that's not the worst thing in the world because you do have, you know, good batting average sources. You have guys who are going to steal bases. Like it is, like Scott said, it's not super heavy in any one place, but it should be pretty good all around.
It for the head-to-head categories specifically, because we're used to thinking in terms of roto leagues. I prefer the really impactful in one area guys because you know they're going to consistently be delivering from week to week in that one area. When if you have more across the board contributors, it's hard to say exactly what they're going to give you when, and it may not be as reliable from week to week, and that may lead to more volatility for your team. So it's kind of a minor point, but I think it's worth bringing up if you have the choice between, say, a Corey Seager who's going to be going to be very reliable for batting average versus a Francisco Lindor who does everything pretty well, but nothing exceptionally well.
On the pitching side, I wound up with Brandon Woodruff, Joe Musgrove, Lance Lynn, Tyler Glasnow, Jesus Luzardo. On the bench, I've got Sonny Gray, Ross Stripling, John Gray as the starters. And then the relievers, I've got Ryan Presley, Evan Phillips, Jose Leclerc, Michael Fulmer, and Carlos Estevez. So like we were talking about on yesterday's podcast, just kind of talking through strategy, I usually like to have 5 or 6 relievers that I can plug in my lineup that will either give me saves or in the case of like an Evan Phillips, even if he's not giving me saves, he'll help out with ratios and strikeouts. And I think the pitching staff turned out all right. It's going to have to wait a little bit for Joe Musgrove, Tyler Glasnow, probably a month or month and a half or so. But yeah, I think it's fine. So good team.
Yeah, I think so too. It's hard to mess up pitching this year. Really, the more I draft, the more I think that's true.
Yeah, and there's just so many fun ones too in those later rounds. Like when you took Reed Detmers and I took Jesus Luzardo, Jeffrey Springs goes off the board, Chris takes Pablo Lopez. It's just, man, like post 150, it just feels like there's still like a lot of really, really exciting pitchers. So you want to save some spots for that later part in the draft. Maybe get 2 or 3 in those first 10 rounds and then kind of load up on some fun upside guys later on. But that'll do it. We're going to wrap there. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball Today. We'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.